made, which is really, I don't know if you know the tower, but they've used it using things from King Arthur. And this guy is Taliesin, and who I heard about, as I said, when I read this book, The White Goddess by Robert Graves, and he talks about Taliesin as this inspired poet, and there's not so much known about him, because in those days, consciously, the Celtic people didn't write things down. They thought knowledge was too precious to be just, to be just written down, and so these bards, and the bard would be a storyteller and a singer, and also a teacher, and he'd know the history and the mythology, you could say, of the tribe, and so he would be there to in a banquet or something in the king's court. I mean, there'd be all sorts of bards would say the king's, but he would sing in the banquet, and it would be something about the history or the mythology of the tribe, and to help people have a sense of who we are and a pride in who we are. But there's an interesting story about how this chap got his powers, and in this story there's this great nature goddess who had a son who was so ugly, and she was afraid that he'd be badly treated when he grew up and he wouldn't be able to be a significant person. So she wanted to make him a wise person, maybe like who's the guy, Socrates, was an ugly person but very wise. And so she decided to make this potion of all sorts of herbs, and she put them in a big cauldron, which is a big cooking pot, and this was going to boil for a year and a day, if I remember. Well, remember, I wasn't there at the time, but if I remember the story. And so this is bubbling away, and so she had a blind man to look after it, and also this young boy called Guion, who good is not here, otherwise he might be embarrassed. He told me, and also Olwyn, that they never realised how difficult it was for them when they came to Holland because people couldn't pronounce their names. Anyway, Guion, but as this was bubbling away, she must have got it turned on a little bit too high, and one drop, it overboiled, and one drop came out. There's a similar story in Ireland. One drop came up, and it hit Taliesin on his thumb or his finger or somewhere, and he stuck it in his mouth, and suddenly he was enlightened, because all the wisdom in all this liquid had gone into this one drop. So this drop that was intended for this ugly son had gone to him, like maybe he was like Jacob and was against Esau, I don't know, but anyway. And then he had all realization, and of course she had all knowledge, and so both times they both realized what had gone on, and he realized he was in big trouble. Nothing that he'd done himself, but somehow he'd been given what was intended for somebody else. So he hightailed it out of there, as I think it's an American expression, I may be getting it from your presence. He ran out of wherever it was and just trying to get away. But for Edwin also was tuned in, and so she ran after him. So in desperate to get away from her, he changed himself into a hare. Do you know what a hare is? It's one of these guys. They're very active in March. That's why I like the hare, because it's my birthday time. So they're very active. They're like a rabbit with longer legs, and
longer ears.
And longer ears. That's right. And so he changed himself into a hare, or maybe a rabbit. No, I think a hare. And it doesn't really matter anyway. And so he ran, but she was pretty wise too. So she turned herself into a hound, a greyhound, and they could run very fast. So as she was catching up, then fortunately he came to a river, and so he jumped in the river and turned himself into a fish. And then he was fishing and he thought, oh, now I'm safe. And I don't know how fish think, but anyway, he was thinking he was safe. But then she also jumped in the river and turned herself into an otter, and otters are very fast swimmers. So again, she was chasing him, and so just about catch him, he came out of the water and he flew up in the sky, skylark, and he was cheeping and chirping away, thinking, yeah, now I've got away. But then she changed herself into a hawk, And so she was about to attack him when he dropped to the ground, and he turned himself into a grain of wheat. You know, wheat? And in a big pile, you see. So he thought, well, now she'll never find me here, but she was a wise woman, so she was pecking along, and so she found him as a grain of wheat and swallowed him. But that, folks, is not the end of the story, because as sometimes girls tell a funny story about this, it must have been something I ate, you know, when they're so embarrassed or afraid what their parents might say when they've started to develop a tummy. 9 months later, she gave birth.
To what?
She gave birth.
To what?
To a little boy.
Oh.
Not a chicken or a... could be. But yeah, they were not as imaginative as you are. And she gave birth to a boy, and and he was so beautiful. Gwyn actually means fair, you know, good looking. So I guess he, you know, was still anyway. But he was so beautiful that she didn't, she couldn't kill him. So she put him in a leather bag and threw him in the water. Maybe I know, but yeah, I can't change the story. If I do, you know, I'll be struck by all the Celtic spirit will attack me. And so she turned into a. No, sorry. He was floating around in this leather bag, and it must have been waterproof leather. Or anyway, he floated about, and there was this prince, Elfin his name was, and this poor guy, he was, you know, all thumbs and whatever. He was always unlucky. Everything went wrong with him, and when he went fishing, he never caught any fish. So his father decided, who was the king, that he'd help him. So he said, on this day, nobody's going to be able to fish except for my son. But unfortunately, when he went out that day, there'd been a big storm the night before, so there were fish in the water. But he saw this little leather bag, and so he pulled it out, and this boy was so beautiful, so that he exclaimed, Taliesin, which in Welsh means shining brow. You know, sort of it's like as if the light was emanating from his forehead. And so this guy, this prince was unfortunately, you know, not very bright, but this guy Taliesin was, you know, knew everything, was a beautiful, wonderful poet, and so he protected Elfin when Elfin was being attacked, and not just with the sword, but with his words and everything. And it is said that he then became the bard to King Arthur, and when King Arthur went into the other world, the underworld, whatever you like to call it, it's not necessarily hell, but it's under this looking for the cauldron, which was like a little bit like a predecessor of the Holy Grail. Taliesin was one of those that went with him, and only 7 of them came back, and he became this great bard. And there are still, again, he's a bit like Arthur, you know. There's some historical guy, but there's also some mythical, and he was also a friend of Merlin, who again, there's a historical Merlin, but there's all sorts of mythology connected with it. And here you see him there, and so I don't know if you can see here, but it doesn't really matter. But the images they've done are very nice. That you can see the images of the fish, and then above that, and then the bird, and he's wearing feathers. So the feathers are symbolic of being like a shaman, of being able to fly. That means it's like when you meditate, that you're able to go into other worlds and consult or be consulted. But anyway, it signifies connection with the thing. And could you show that other picture? Just
which one?
The one. Well, I included that in the thing because it's like.
Arthur?
No, the one before. I included that in the pub. Well, in the pub. Anyway, the one that's okay. In the publicity, there's a little me and a big me, because just to show that, you know, there is always the inner child is always there, and the inner child may need some help to recover from his traumas or her traumas. But this is a cauldron that was found in Denmark, but it is Celtic in its, you know, it's not me. It's just claiming it's recognised as being Celtic, but having all sorts of influences. And it's interesting, the horns signify some spiritual growth, connection with the other world. There are also depictions of Moses like this, and he's sort of become like the Lord of the Animals. And it's interesting because I never knew the Celts practiced yoga, but it looks like he's in a yoga posture. But and of course he's holding the snake, because snakes can or serpents can be good and they can be bad. And it's interesting, they have the two tongues, which can be for good or bad. Often in the Bible you think of them as bad, but they're not necessarily bad. They're also a source of wisdom, just like the angels. So they are very, very relevant to the whole questions we understand about the angel, who can be very wise and very helpful, or can be very destructive. And the talk, this is a sort of a thing that the Celts do, as a sort of thing with the two things. They wear them around their necks as some sort of sign of authority, I think. But also he's Lord of the Animals. So for unification, it's the one reason I did all. Well, no, I realised afterwards, sort of like the picture of me is like sort of the hope of the individual blessing, and then the second one is communication, which is like the second blessing with Taliesin, and the third one is sort of Lord of Creation, which is like the third blessing. So anyway, so I became very interested in him. But the reason I also included it in this story is that you can be enlightened as he was, and as I was when I heard the principle. But that's not the end of the story. In a way, that's just the beginning. And I now look on it in my own life as when I heard the principle, when I joined the Unified Family, it was I got out of Egypt. But what happened when the folks got out of Egypt? They had to wander around this is not original. Father talked about this too. But they had to wander around in the desert for 40 years. And interestingly, actually, it was 43 years between me getting out of there and me going and living out Amsterdam Noord. And in the meantime, as some of you know, and so I went through all sorts of up and down things, and which I went into in great detail in the previous show, but I don't think it's necessary now. But the amazing thing, what happened to me, and it relates to the song I said, if you don't do nothing, nothing will happen. Somehow, even though when I was living here, I was in a state of total depression, not because of some people think the centre could be nicer, but it wasn't because of that. It was all within me. But I used to go to my doctor quite often. I know. And so he recommended I go for psychotherapy, which was a complete and utter waste of time. There's no criticism of the psychotherapist, but then this guy was good enough and humble enough to realise he couldn't really help me, so he sent me to a colleague of his, and probably a member of the same synagogue as his. He was a Orthodox Jew, and so I went to this wise old man, and he gave me some medication, and he told me I needed to smart myself up. I realised that I'd got in such a state, and I had these these shoes, these sort of sports shoes, and when sports shoes get old, these plastic things, so the inside starts to come out. Maybe none of you have had the shoe that long enough that the inside starts coming out. And this shoe was like this, and I was sitting there, and he must have thought. So he spoke very strongly to me that I had to, look after myself and that. But magically, this medication, whatever it is, it changed things radically for me. And not only did I lose all the depression, and worse than depression, I thought I was evil actually. So I didn't want to be near my children, because I thought my evil outstraling would have a bad effect on them. And I thought I was going to die any day. I mean, these are just words, but it was real. But all that went away. It's quite amazing. And also what went away was, I referred to it earlier, this sense of alienation, of sort of living in a bit of a bubble. You know the word empathy? I like the word empathy, and I'd always talked about it, but when